Welcome to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings on the industry you can regularly read over on the Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can listen to on Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. He and I are recording this week's show on Friday, February 23rd, 2024. And Drew, you've been up since the butt crack of dawn.
I have been.
And that was because the Warner Brothers Discovery fourth quarter earnings call that 8 a.m. East Coast time?
8 a.m. East Coast. I don't know why they did it so early, but yes, I was up at 5 o'clock. It was tough.
Okay.
It was tough, but we'll talk about that soon.
Well, we will. No, in fact, we're going to talk about it now.
Okay.
Because that's the thing. There's this wonderful article over at The Wrap written by Drew Taylor, which talks about Warner Brothers Discovery's attack plan for 2024. Mr. Zaslav, the CEO and president over there, spoke of this attack plan as one of the reasons that we're getting some of the very best people coming on board with us over there. And some of those very best people are actually your good, close personal friend, Mr. Cruz. Is that correct?
Yes. They formally announced a new project with him and Alejandro Inarritu, who won the Oscar for The Revenant, and I think he won for Birdman too, actually. So, but yeah, they don't know what that project is, but it is happening apparently. No mention of what we wish someone had brought up.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about that because again, they acknowledged, that 2023 between The Flash, Aquaman, and The Lost Kingdom of The Color Purple didn't deliver the way they wanted, and even with a big hit like Barbie, which heavily favored headed into award season here, and also Wonka, which is I was surprised to see that really has legs. What is it, 10 weeks now that it's been in the top 5?
If you look at The Wrap this week, Jim, you'll see an interview I did with Paul King, who directed Wonka, and he actually talked to me about his version of Disney's Pinocchio that he spent years on.
By the way, the last 5 minutes of Paul King's Wonka have literally become my security blanket. No, seriously, that just, if I'm having a bad day, and I need, something peaceful. The last 5 minutes of that thing where he becomes Willy Wonka, you literally see him bring use his imagination to bring the chocolate factory that we know from the 71 film to life. I cannot tell you how many times I've watched that. So, all right, definitely going to read that. But now to circle back to the thing we were just talking about, the no Coyote and nothing. There was no mention at all during the earnings call of this.
No, there was
any acknowledgement.
No, there was no, and nobody brought it up. He didn't acknowledge it. I think the only Coyote versus Acme type thing that happened was after the call. It was almost like Zaslav ran off a cliff because the stock price dropped 13%. It's the first streaming service to make money, and it still dropped 13%.
By the way, it's worth noting here that this was not the only studio in town that had a bad day. I mean, Paramount Global, their credit rating actually got downgraded to negative by SB Global. So this is an interesting time, particularly given all of this talk of, companies that may be merging or looking to position themselves to, look good and get sold. But also worth noting about Coyote versus Acme. This past weekend, the Annies were held at Royce Hall, UCLA, and at one point in the proceeding, Eric Braza, who is the voice of, these days, a number of Looney Tune characters, Bugs Bunny, Marvin Martian, Daffy Duck, as he was at the podium at the Annies, actually shouted out, "Release Coyote versus Acme." And have you heard any news on that? There's been nothing. Right?
It's not looking good. It's not looking good. I was hoping that someone would bring it up to him just so that he would have to say, yes, it's gone, or no, we sold it, or something.
I just don't get this. Especially when you have a streaming service that made money that's, people would pay attention for 2 hours to your streaming service if this were running. All right. Anyway, we were just talking about the Annies. We'll have more about the Annies in a moment. But first, news on Fine Tuning is brought to you by Touring Plans. If you're headed down to Orlando anytime soon to visit some of the theme parks you'll find there, touring plans can help you save time. More importantly, it can help you save money. So before you book that flight to Central Florida, go check out touringplans.com and you can thank us later. All right, 51st Annie's, again, as we mentioned, held at Royce Hall this past weekend. And the big winner was Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Took home 7 awards: Best Feature, Best Effects, Best Character Design, Best Production Design, Best Direction of a Feature, Best Music in an Animated Feature, and then Best Editorial. And were you surprised by that, Drew? Because, up until this point, it just seemed like The Boy and the Heron, the Hayao Miyazaki, had been kind of sweeping all of the other award ceremonies.
Yeah, it surprised me a little bit. I just thought that this race was a little bit more wide open, and I'm hoping that the Oscar race still is. They actually just started voting yesterday, and every branch can vote for the Animated Feature Award, so it's going to be interesting because there's a lot of heat around Nimona. We'll talk about Robot Dreams in a minute, and Elemental is still, I think, has a good shot. So, yeah, it's interesting that Spider-Verse swept it, but it's also an amazing movie, and I totally understand it as well. So, yeah.
No. I get it. Now, you mentioned Nimona. That did get a little love. Now, mind you, it went into the Annies with 9 nominations. It was the most of any animated feature this year. It only took home 2. One for Chloe Grace Moritz, voice acting as the film's title character, and then one for the screenplay. And also worth noting that The Boy and the Heron didn't go home empty-handed either. Took home the Annie for character animation and also one for storyboarding. And Disney, well, it did get one for Marvel, the character animation in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. That's Rocket and his animal pals. Also want to point out on a previous edition of the Fine Tuning, Drew talked up the War is Over animated short, the one that's inspired by the music of John and Yoko. That took home the best animated short, Annie. And that bodes well for the Oscars. But you got the opportunity the day after the Annies to chat with the folks behind Robot Dreams, right?
Yes, I did. I talked to Pablo Berger. It was a honestly sold out show at the Arrow in Santa Monica on Sunday morning. And yeah, so we had a really great conversation. The movie is amazing. He is so sweet and lovely. And I just love that movie so much. So yeah, I know it doesn't come out until May for most people, but just remember it.
All right, moving on to other news now. And this one hurts. We lost Ken Melton earlier this week. In fact, Thursday, February 22nd. And I don't know how many people outside of the industry know Ken, but trust me, you've seen his work or you've seen stuff that was influenced by his work. He was the guy who did the maquette. In fact, I can remember the first time I saw one of his maquettes. I was visiting a friend at the Magic of Disney Animation at MGM Studios, and they had just gotten the box of the maquettes for Aladdin. And, and it was just, what was so cool was to watch animators these guys are sitting there who have the model sheets on their desk or working on things, and they were marveling at how well these things were.
No, I remember those maquettes, like the back of them. They were so well posed. There was so much character that came through the maquettes. Jim is alluding to his time with Disney Animation in the 90s, but he touched so many animation studios, and then to have him...
He did. Yeah, please. Mm-hmm.
He was I think he was at DreamWorks, he was at Pixar, and he was doing real maquette, like show used maquettes for Leica later in his career. And, those are just so beautiful. I think Shannon Tyndall, who's a friend of mine, put up a great photo of the big skeleton guy from Kubo and the Two Strings.
Oh, yeah.
And it is just absolutely stunning, for him to go from those maquettes to things that were in the movies. Yeah, he's a genius.
And what's so fascinating about his story is that, this is literally a kid who grew up in rural Missouri, okay? And, he would finish his farm chores and then go into his bedroom and pull out a sketch pad. He taught himself to draw. And but he eventually moved from drawing to sculpting. And he did a sculpt of the Beatles, which he then took to a music festival in Chicago. And what was interesting is, again, didn't know what would happen, but just wanted to bring to the music festival and see what the reaction was. There was a guy from Hanna-Barbera at the music festival who saw these Beatles sculpts and said, "Oh, you got to come work for us." And so he gets hired by Hanna-Barbera. And, and he ends up doing maquettes of, classic Hanna-Barbera characters like the Flintstones and the Jetsons. And then as they start to do new stuff, and this is, I got to find these. He evidently did a set of sculpts for do you remember they did that Ed Grimley animated series? Okay, just it was on for like 5 minutes, but again, I was a fan of Martin Short's character from SCTV, so this was something I went on and I want to watch. But anyway, he's working at Hanna-Barbera, and one day at his house, they're having his son's 4th birthday. And you know how it is, when you get a kid has a birthday and the other parents come and bring their children and drop them off, and when do I have to come back and collect them and that sort of thing. And it turns out that one of the parents that's coming to his son's 4th birthday works at Disney. He's an art director, and so the very next Monday he goes into work, and here's John Musker and Ron Clements, and they're about to begin working on Aladdin, and they're like, well, we should really get some maquettes going for this, but who can sculpt these things? And the art director's like, I was at a kid's birthday party this weekend. I was walking through the house. There were these maquettes, and this guy who's doing stuff for Hanna-Barbera, and we should bring him in. And that's how he got the gig. And from there, it's Aladdin, it's Lion King, it's Pocahontas, it's Hunchback, all the way up till, what is it? Atlantis, the Lost Empire. And then, as you mentioned, in between there, he sort of decamps to DreamWorks and does Prince of Egypt and Road to El Dorado and Spirits, and also Thumbelina, which I found kind of interesting. I guess that for Don Bluth. And as you mentioned, he did do some stuff for Pixar. In fact, it was amazing. If you've ever seen the Edna Mode that he did for The Incredibles, I mean, that pose was all the way through the film. But yeah, like you said, he was up at Leica doing actual, production maquettes for them all the way through to, I guess, Box Trolls. But then sadly, he got felled by Louis' body dementia, and we lost him at 68. In fact, he returned to Missouri. He died in his home in Stone County. So this is a huge loss. And I have to tell you personally, I have been trying 30 plus years to get my hand on one of his genie maquettes. They are so beautifully sculpted in such strong poses, and I'll get it someday. But all right. And speaking of magical creatures, however, just today we learned that a new iteration of the Fairly Oddparents has been ordered to the series by Nickelodeon. And again, Drew, obviously you saw the original, created by Butch Hartman, debuted on Nickelodeon back in 1998. Must have seen one of the 10 seasons that was out there.
It was during that period in my life, Jim, when I was too cool to be watching cartoons. But clearly the pendulum has swung in the other direction all these years later.
Cosmo and Wanda, were such lovely characters, and again, the interaction with Timmy Turner, with those two. And what's great about this new show, Fairly Oddparents, A New Wish, is they are bringing back Susan Blakesley and Darren Harris to voice Wanda and Cosmo respectively. Now, mind you, it's it's the Drew Taylor business model, the one that Drew regularly calls out. Nickelodeon has ordered 20 episodes of this series, which will debut on that cable channel this spring, and then it'll show up on Netflix internationally later next year. But what's the smart money here, Drew? So 20 episodes means
2 seasons.
2 seasons
Yeah.
10, right?
You saw that Clone High is back for season 2. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right. So the same thing. And what's also nice about this, because remember that when, for example, Animaniacs came back, came back with the original voice cast, but did not come back. They didn't bring back the original writers, the directors, people like Peter Hastings. This time around, the series will be co-executive produced by Butch Hartman, the creator of the original. And Fred Siebert, who executive produced the original series, will be back. Have to wonder if Vicky or Crocker, the teacher who determined to prove that fairies are real, I wonder if those characters will return. Anyway, again, that show debuted in the late 90s, and a film that debuted in that same window of time, Fantasia 2000. When we get back from this break, Drew and I are going to talk about one particular segment from that film and why we're celebrating that this year. But first, this. And we're back. Before we get started here, Drew, you had some news about Owaju, the animated series.
Yeah, so that's premiering, I believe, this week. So I just wanted to let everybody know how great the show is. It's really strong animation and a really engrossing story, and it is this wonderful, combination of a small animation studio out of Britain that's kind of African based, and also Walt Disney Animation Studios. You'll see a lot of familiar names in the credits. Natalie Norgett, who Jim and I have followed for years, she's the head of story, and Marlon, who has done so many amazing water effects and things for Moana and everything. He's director of visual effects. So a lot of people know, and then a lot of people you don't know, and it's a wonderful story, and I just want to tell everybody that they should watch when it's on because it's really great.
At the very least, go seek out the trailer, which is pretty spectacular. I mean, it just, sort of establishes the world, establishes the character style. Looks like kind of a wild story, actually. Can't wait for what is it they used to have in He-Man, the battle cat, when the tiger transformed. I want to see the lizard. What is it? The chameleon or whatever it is. I want to see the battle version of the toy they make of that, because that looked pretty wild in the trailer.
Yeah, the little lizard is really a fun character, and it's not like Baymax and Hero where they're like, and they're bonded initially. She's she's skeptical of this lizard,
No, I actually love that moment in the trailer where Dad presents his So
anyway, check it out. Great stuff.
Now, on to Fantasia 2000, which, again, was released at theaters in December of 99. In fact, I don't want to brag here, but Nancy and I, along with our friends Jeff Lang and his bride Flo, we sprang for the tickets to see it when it was presented at Carnegie Hall.
And how do you get to Carnegie Hall, Jim?
Well, in this case, you drive several hours down from New Hampshire.
I thought it was practice, but yeah. Okay.
No, we're not. I'm not going for those old jokes. But we were up in the nosebleed seats, and I'm trying to remember. Nancy, was there a live orchestra for Fantasia 2000? There was. We saw it with a live orchestra. Go figure. But when I was living in Florida, I mentioned at the top of the show, I had friends who worked at Feature Animation Florida. So those guys very, very early on were looped into the fact that, Disney was going to be making another Fantasia. In fact, they would have the gong shows where people would take pieces of classical music and pitch their ideas for, what could be done with this stuff. But again, I'm old. I remember when Disney in the 80s was looking to do a Fantasia follow-up, and this was Musicana.
Yeah.
All right, so you know about that one.
Yeah, wasn't the idea, Walt's idea, right, was that it would sort of be a living thing that every few years there would be segments that would swap in and out. And Musicana was an actual attempt at a complete follow-up to it, right?
It was. It was. In fact, what's kind of interesting is I don't remember the piece of music that it was supposed to be built around, but there's that whole The Emperor's Nightingale. Yep. There's a storybook out there that, in fact, what's interesting is all the drawings in it are done by John Lasseter, and it's of Mickey as the Emperor's attendant, and the songbird that he has. But anyway, what was also interesting about Musicana was it was going to be, face it, Fantasia is a lovely film, but all of the music for it, classical music, was done by European composers, and the notion was, okay, for this next film, we want to do some American music. In fact, I'm sure, Drew, you've seen some of the drawings that were done for, I want to say there was one sequence in this that was going to be done to the music of Fats Waller, and it was all frogs and bowler hats and, playing in a jazz band, that sort of thing. And
just think, Jim, there could be a frog in a bowler hat in a stairwell today. Just like poor Joe Gardner sitting in the stairwell at a dumpy hotel in Anaheim.
Have you made that? Sorry, Drew is, of course, referring to the Pixar Place Hotel. Have you and Katie made it down there yet?
No, we haven't. I mean, I've heard it's still kind of a dump in terms of the level of sound from room to room. Also, Jim, you could not, if Jim was actually paying me a living wage, I would not even go, because the rooms are like $400 a night. It's like insane.
We were just talking with friends about traveling down to Orlando sometime this spring. And literally the notion is, and let's not go to Disney. Let's not go to Universal. We were, in fact, talking about doing a day at, say, Discovery Cove. And then and there's this very amazing place just on the other side of Tampa where it's an elephant reserve or preserve.
Oh, wow.
It's all of these. And so the thing is, you pay for the privilege to go for the day to feed and wash and tend the elephants.
That sounds much better to me than waiting 2 hours for 60 seconds on Tron Light Cycle Run, and lining Bob Iger's pockets. I think that tending to animals sounds much better to me.
I will say this, though. The one thing I do want to do at some point at the Pixar Place Hotel is go see Bing Bong. I'm not thrilled about the idea that the only place on the planet you can go to see Bing Bong again is this $400 or $500 a night hotel.
Yeah. And that
is an exclusive to people who are staying there. But, I'm happy to finally see that character, out and about, so to speak.
You're right. It's just too, it's not fun to go to the parks anymore. It's such a hassle. Show me the lie, Jim.
And this is why Disney fans listen to the show. There we go. Okay. Anyway, we were talking about American music, and again, and we bring that up for this show in particular because this month is the 100th anniversary of the very first performance of Rhapsody in Blue, written, of course, by George Gershwin. But what's fascinating is it was band director Paul Whiteman who commissioned it. And it was a piano solo backed by a jazz band. And what's interesting is the version we know today, the full symphonic version, that didn't come about till 1942. But beautiful piece of music, very evocative, animator Eric Goldberg, and we'll get to that in a moment. So anyway, back to what, again, initially was called Fantasia Continued. In fact, as the story goes, it was at the very first meeting with Roy E. Disney and Michael Eisner sat down after Eisner had officially become the Disney CEO. And, his reward to Roy for backing his bid to become Disney's new CEO. And Michael said, well, what do you want? And Roy said two things. I want to be in charge of feature animation, and I want to talk with you about circling back on the idea of doing more segments for Fantasia, because that's something Walt wanted to do, and I feel like that's something, we should do. And so again, they start talking in 84, but they don't get serious about it till, they get the first couple of successes under their belt. And once Mermaid really connected, it's like, okay, let's look at that. But here's the thing I find fascinating, especially with, Maestro up for so many awards this year. The very first person that Eisner goes to when he's looking for somebody to, face it, Leopold Stokowski was the conductor that was associated with the original Fantasia. We need somebody with equal heft in the modern music sphere, to be, our front man for Fantasia Continued. So Eisner sits down with Leonard Bernstein.
The maestro himself?
So, and it's just, and evidently Bernstein is genuinely intrigued, and they start to talk money, they start to talk contracts, but then sadly we lose Bernstein in October of 1990. And eventually that's how we get James Levine. He signs on to do the project this December of 91. And then, it's just sort of like, as Drew mentioned, it was, the whole gimmick of Fantasia was going to be that you swapped segments in and out, that there'd be this mix of the familiar and the new. And so what ends up happening is that, they look at the original Fantasia and decide, okay, so whatever we do here, and at this point, the movie is supposed to come out in 1997. Said, whatever we do here, we're going to hang on to The Sorcerer's Apprentice, The Nutcracker Suite, and Dance of the Hours. And then it's, this whole notion of, all right, let's, we could do some new stuff. And so, they look at things like the Firebird Suite and Carnival of the Animals. In fact, what's kind of interesting is Carnival of the Animals is Eric Goldberg. And in fact, he, drives the bus for the animation on the thing, but his wife, Susan, art directs it. And it's also this sort of, Murderer's Row kind of a project, because it's Joe Grant who comes up with the idea for this thing, which actually keys off of evidently Mike Gabriel, Eric's co-director on Pocahontas. When they were working on the film and having problems, Michael, to relieve tension, would play with a yo-yo. And Joe was the one who noticed it, and evidently at one point drew an image of an ostrich with a yo-yo. And so and everyone thought, oh, that's a funny idea. Maybe let's take the music from Carnival of the Animals and do that. But I guess it was Susan, again, the art director, who was like, no. This needs color. Ostriches are black, and more to the point, you're doing Dance of the Hours. The ostrich, we've already got ostriches in this movie. Why don't we go with instead flamingos? Because, think about it, pink flamingos, a splash of color, and that's what they went with. And so that was supposed to be Eric's only contribution to the original Fantasia Continued.
Well, the other thing you have to say, though, too, Jim, is that you're saying that he drew that during Pocahontas. Whenever anybody was off of a movie or in between a movie, they would shuttle them into what they called special projects, which was like the dumping ground. But at the same time, this is where things like Runaway Brain came from. This is where the Nazi propaganda sequence for Rocketeer came from. And one of the things that they always said when they sat somebody down in this blank room was, well, why don't you think about something for Fantasia? And so that's where a lot of these things came from, right? As just these people who were in between projects.
Yeah. Now, speaking of which, though, and in fact, this is what's a fascinating part of Eric Goldberg's career, because, again, remember, he doesn't come to work for Disney till, late 80s, early 90s. And again, they bring him in deliberately to do The Genie in Aladdin. And remember, The Genie was largely inspired by the wonderful drawings that Al Hirschfeld used to do for the New York Times, so the various plays and musicals that would open in New York. And what's interesting is that Eric and Al become friends over the course of Aladdin. And Eric wants to keep this collaboration going. And so what he does is, and again, this is on a totally separate track than him working on Pocahontas or him working on, Carnival of Animals, is that he goes to, he goes to Al and says, look, I'd love to do an entire short in your style. I mean, it was lovely to do the genie, and but I want to try to do a whole film, your stuff, the things you do for the New York Times theater page, but animated. And he says, I think I have an idea, because I feel like it's a story that has to be set in New York City. And I'm thinking the perfect piece of music for this would be Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. And Al, Al loves this idea. And so he gives his blessing. And so Eric begins working on it more as a personal passion project. But over time he realizes that, I'm going to need some help, and more to the point, between, arranging for the music rights and, and again, Rhapsody in Blue, this has got to be Vivid Color, and, he gets Susan involved and that sort of thing. But he realizes I'm going to need, the studio's backing. And so he brings Rhapsody in Blue to Disney. And initially, this is what fascinates me, is Disney lets him work on it thinking, well, this is a short. There's literally no talk of this going into Fantasia Continued, because we already have a Eric Goldberg scene. We already have the flamingos with the yo-yos. But now they begin to do test screenings of Fantasia Continued around the country. And what they find is that 3 scenes from the original Fantasia is one scene too many. That, that, and in fact, when they collect the cards at the end of the screenings, it's basically, look, the old stuff is boring, and can we have less of the old stuff? So this is when they make the decision to actually pull the Nutcracker Suite out of the movie. But now, Fantasia 2000, because again, at this point, we've slid past the 97 delivery date. It's like, it needs something. And that's when they pivot. And it's like, well, that Rhapsody in Blue thing, the short, could that be the new chunk? And that, to me, I find that fascinating, that this was never supposed to be part of Fantasia and winds up being one of the real.
It's the only thing anybody remembers from that Fantasia. Didn't Eric Goldberg do the Donald Duck, Noah's Ark as well?
He might have done some work on it. I mean, face it, remember, that's the
wasn't that inspired by Eisner's kid graduating?
Was it Pomp and Circumstance? Yeah. Well, you remember the original version of Disney's Pomp and Circumstance, right? The one that was the parade of the princess's baby.
Oh yes, that was. I don't think they ever animated that, but somebody pitched it for sure.
Well, no. There's a Leica reel. Okay. There's boards.
We need to. Someone needs to liberate this from the dark vault.
Well, that's the weird part. I know for a fact it was shown, actually, I want to say, on the Disney Magic as part of an animation presentation. And every so often, someone alludes to the fact that I may have a copy. I really want to see this because, well, the conceit, right? That it's the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland who, her crown falls apart during the ceremony and she keeps trying to steal crowns off of the little princess babies. And I guess it's Donald who's the footman who's delivering the pillows with all the crowns. And so he's the one battling with the Red Queen. I mean, it sounds like a really funny idea.
It's a sad that we have to be in international waters to be able to see it, but But how many, true. You bring up Eric's short or section for this. You and I both know that I would say for the past 15 years, he's been pitching a third Fantasia. At one point, there were so many pitches of his that Lasseter referred to Fantasia 3 as the Goldberg variations. and it never happened. And you and I remember too that, in the early 2000s, you would see bits of the third Fantasia come out as the little matchstick girl. And what were some of the other ones that sort of eked out?
Oh God. One by One.
Yes,
I mean,
One by
remember,
One.
this was the international music version.
Oh, speaking of that, Jim, did you see that Glago's guest wound up on YouTube?
No.
Okay, I'm going to send it. I hope it's still there because I will send it to you directly.
Oh,
But
no. I have been trying to see
It's really
this.
great. And I texted Chris Williams right afterwards and said, great short, man. It's finally out there. And he had no idea, but watched it again.
Wow.
So, yes.
Okay, no. Send that video
Okay.
now.
Okay.
No. In fact, we now have to end the show quickly, folks, because I want to see this before this just disappears. So, all right. In closing now, I want to remind you about the wonderful Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, which Drew does with his very talented co-host, Charles Hood. I know you've been going through your back catalog of shows, and that's a great idea because you have some amazing interviews.
Yeah, I don't even know what the next one is, but we've been churning these out, and it's been a lot of fun to revisit. So that's what we're doing right now. And then we've got some big stuff on the horizon that I can't talk about yet, but should be very fun. And Jim, it's still online on YouTube. Type in Glago's guest.
Okay, all right. Well, again, we're moving fast now here, folks. I gotta get all right. So, want to remind you other podcasts that we do here at Jim Hill Media. We got, of course, Disney Dish, which I do with Len Testa. We have Looking at Lucasfilm, which I do with Brian Gahn. We have the recently revived Universal show, the Epic Universal podcast, which I do with Eric Hersey. And then we even have our newly revived merch podcast, I Want That Too, which I do with Lauren Hersey. So, that we have those out there for you to sample. And let's also not forget about Disney Unpacked, a brand new video series, Len and I are doing with veteran Imagineer Jim Schul. And next month, we are doing a deep dive on Rock and Roller Coaster. And by the way, as one of the supporting shows of this thing, we're doing a look at Discovery Bay, folks, and how that led to a lot of stuff that went to Disneyland Paris. So be sure and check that out.
You're doing an episode on Rock and Roller Coaster? Wait a second. I think I love that idea.
That's a really good
There you
Steven
go.
Tyler. He's a man of many talents, folks. Okay, let's see. Beyond that, let's talk social media. And
Yeah, I am. I mean, who has time for that, Jim, when I've got 1,100 other things to do? But yeah, Drew tailored like a tailored shirt on all social media platforms: Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
Okay, cool. And same thing here. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. And okay, one final favor, folks, before we head out the door here and rush to go see Glago's Glago's guest. If you could, please go over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review, well, not just the show you're listening to right now, Fine Tuning, but also Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. That would be incredibly helpful. And beyond that, like I said, some amazing stories by Drew Taylor over at The Wrap. In fact, again, if you want to learn more about this Warner Brothers Discovery earnings call, again, great piece at The Wrap right now. Go read it. And that'll do it for this week.
That's it, Jim. I'm going to go to sleep now. Yes.
Okay, we're done.